Hey, welcome to Talking Niagara, everybody. Good morning. It's March 11th this morning. Well, another day done, Dave. What you been doing?
Did the bingo thing yesterday, that kind of thing. Going to go look at a house today with my son, with one
Oh
of my
yeah,
sons.
they're using your experience, are they?
Yes, and it's kind of paying off because having done this and actually even being part of construction crews that put houses together, knowing old houses, knowing
Yeah.
this, I could look at the superstructure. I could look at things
Well,
that normally other people don't look at. People look in and they see a nice house with a brand new this or that, and I can go in the basement and say, no, what about this? What
yeah,
about that?
that's exactly what I do. It's like because of the experience of my father being a home builder. No, if my father being would have been like yourself, commercial builder, but he did homes, did home renovations as well on the side.
Yeah, I've done a bunch myself, um, of home renovations, so I'm familiar with. As a matter of fact, when the house inspector came in, and one of my youngest son bought a house. And when the home inspector came in, I was able to point things out that he didn't see.
Yeah,
That's just through experience, you
yeah.
know.
Well, a lot of the things is, if you're buying a home, go down to the basement. Always go down to the basement, right?
The place to start. The other place is the roof.
Yeah,
Those two are the important parts.
yeah. You don't
There
always see the roof in
insulation?
the
Yeah.
winter, but yeah, I get your point. Yeah. And then you've got to look under under the sink, and you're looking for things like black mold.
Yeah, you could do all that kind of
You
thing.
know,
Your house inspector should pick those up, but in my experience, house inspectors come in all varieties.
most are lazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
In one of the houses that we were, this house inspector came in. He didn't know the difference between plumb and level.
yeah.
I'm serious. The guy didn't know what the difference was plumb and level.
Mm, really?
Yeah,
Mm,
that was like. And then another guy came in one time. We had a sump pump problem. He said it was our uh, humidifier.
but he
There's
can get in.
no way that could have been the humidifier. And I was the one that discovered the problem. It was a sump
A
pump.
home inspector could get in a lot of trouble if you buy a home relying upon a home inspection report, and that home inspection report doesn't uncover an issue that you later find. They can end up being sued. We've taken a few of those cases. Dave? Dave. Anyway, moving on. Let me see if that brings him back. Hey Dave. Hey Dave. All is well. All is well. I'm hoping that you do come back. I'm hoping that you manage to get that sorted. Okay. So the first story we've got here, which I was hoping Dave would be the one to be commenting upon, would be that tariffs are fueling uncertainty in the home building industry in Niagara.
I'm back.
Yeah, I can see that. All right, I was hoping you would have you would have a lot of insight into this one, because that was related to what we were just talking about. Tariffs fueling uncertainty for Niagara's home building industry. I think it does any industry, because if you're using parts which are going to come from the US, that's got to be troublesome.
Yeah, it depends on what tariffs the Canadian government is going to put on American goods. If the Canadian government puts tariffs on home building stuff, then definitely everything's going to go up.
Yeah.
And that because when you right from door handles to windows or whatever, glass for the windows, who knows? We have a cross-border situation here. We have, after all, if you take oil out of the equation, we do the U.S. has over a $50 billion surplus in goods that it ships to Canada.
Yeah.
And many of those are things like, simple things like door handles and
Exactly.
other things of that kind, and if the tariffs go on those things, then house building will go up. And right now, a big part of it is the uncertainty. So if the Canadian government is smart, it will counter tariff certain things that we can get from other sources. Say we could get a door handle from Korea instead of one from the States at a similar price. Maybe then we'll put the tariff on. But if we can't, we should leave that off the tariff, because what we don't want to do, we want to minimize the hurt that's going to come from all of this. But right now, the uncertainty.
It's the price because it's uncertain. It's uncertain times for builders because, what builders rely upon is when they're, if they're designing a building, they know it's going to cost $15.3 million to build it, right? To build an apartment complex. They want certainty that $15.3 million that they plan on spending from the outset is exactly what they do spend within a few thousand here or there. Right? They don't want suddenly the cost of that apartment building going up by 10 million.
Well, that's the situation,
right?
Well, that's the situation we find ourselves in right now.
Yeah,
tariffs will be bad. It will push costs up. Right now, there's a whole level of uncertainty. The chaos that is caused by the Trump administration. It may be a strategic chaos, and that's part of what economists have said. This could be strategic chaos, and the chaos itself is the end game, or it could lead to tariffs. But the whole problem here is we don't know which way it's going to go. Are we going to get more costs? So if you're putting the shovel in the ground to build a house or a bunch of houses, in this case, I think it says, somebody says like 10 houses, who's going to put the shovel in the ground to make 10 houses if they don't know what it's going to cost, and they don't know if they'll be able to sell it? And our housing has already been decreased by 16% at a time where we need even more homes.
Yeah.
So that's here in the Niagara region. It says there's been a lot of slow starts, people walking away from deposits, things of that kind. Yeah, I do hear the echo now.
Yeah, and that's actually, one of the things business doesn't like in any circumstance is uncertainty, right?
Yeah, they like to have things. Well, that's what the USMCA was supposed to solve. The greatest deal of all time, the greatest trade deal ever fashioned, suddenly is not good enough. It suddenly is very bad. Suddenly it's ripping off all of the Americans. It's the trade deal that Trump himself signed. So that USMCA was supposed to be the solid point by which all industries, cars or whatever else, were supposed to base themselves.
And the point being, if you're making 100 houses, you're doing so on the cost factor that you can buy doors, and buy doors at $100 a pop, right? Because you can actually guarantee those costs. So, you know, you want guaranteed costs in your home in your building.
Yeah, obviously, if you're if you're building houses, you're a businessman like everyone else. That's a businessman or a business person, and so you have to estimate the cost of building the home. You have to estimate, kind of determine what your market's going to be. You can't do that in a state of confusion and chaos that is happening right now. Even if the tariffs were clearly defined and you knew that was what's going to happen, that would even be better, despite the fact that it will rise costs and may stifle some investment, because there won't be because the houses then will be more cost prohibitive. At least you know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Right now, you've got this seesaw battle, this foolishness that's going on now. Maybe yes, maybe no. Here's a tariff, here isn't one. So we'll see. But basically, the whole tariff thing, I came across an article where article or something, maybe it was on the radio, but Trump's tariffs are selective. And he has had some pretty sound advice from an economist, a fellow by the name, I think his name is Bennett, who said, no, don't do it this way. Do a 2.5% across the board tariff. If you do that on all things from all over the world, you will generate enough income to begin to pay down the debt. And when that's taken care of, then you can remove the tariffs. But Trump has instead tried to target different countries, Mexico, Canada, and China.
Well, 2.5% is manageable.
Well, yes, it's manageable too, and it is across the board on all things.
Yeah.
And if that happens, then the desired effect of the tariff would be more likely beneficial. That would be more in keeping with McKinley type of tariffs that had happened prior, that did help the United States protect itself while it was building up its economy and industrialization. The situation is much more.
But it's an entirely different situation. When it was building up its industrialization, it had none, right? Or it had relatively little, because it, you know, where initial industrialization in the Americas was primarily in places like New York, Philadelphia, you know, Boston and the like, the East Coast towns. They didn't spread further west than those kind of main centers that had been the early industrial parts of the early industrial development. That's why they needed the tariffs, because they were developing newer towns to the west.
Well, new industries altogether.
Yeah, and new industries altogether. Yeah,
it's very complicated. When the British lost the colonies, part of the peace deal, it wasn't unconditional. Part of the peace deal was that the United States had to be locked into a trade deal with the Brits for 75 years.
Yeah.
And even at the first centennial of the United States, a lot of the little gadgets and little pins and even little things that came in to celebrate the United States were made in Britain, even then, 100 years later. So they were locked into this trade deal with Britain as part of the as part of the revolution, the deal, basically the peace deal.
Yeah.
So and that forced the Americans to buy things and not be and dissuade a lot of industrialization. A little later on, they brought in the tariffs like McKinley did, but he wasn't the president when he brought in those. He was part of a different administration. And once, after a few years, they had their desired effect, he went the other way. He went back to globalization and opening up trade.
Yeah.
kind of a situation where we are now before these tariff threats come in. The biggest problem basically is money has left the United States to be invested elsewhere, particularly in China. And that's U.S. money, basically, that took the industry out of the United States and put it in China and then bought it back again, which made a lot of American investors or Western investors very, very wealthy. And now you kind of trying to blame China and blame Canada and blame Mexico and blame Europe in the blame game kind of thing. We've been ripped off for decades.
Well, yeah, and actually, I've seen one this morning that was saying, and Mike is hooked on this one as well. That we are tariff abusers. That we put up 250% tariff on American food products and dairy.
Well, that is a very minimal amount of the economy that goes back and forth across the United States. They eyeball that a lot, particularly in dairy, but not much else, other agricultural produce. So they zero in on that. But we do bring in more dairy products in from the United States than the United States gets from us. So we are already bringing in much more dairy from the U.S. than the U.S. gets from us, much more. And the reason why we have the tariffs that we do have is to stop overproduction of milk, which is a big problem in the United States. They have a lot of overproduction, so they want to dump it somewhere. One of the things they want to do is dump it in Canada. Whether or not that is sustainable or not, I don't know. But it's a tiny, tiny part. That the figures they come up there with those kind of tariffs are a tiny, tiny part of the trade relationship between Canada and the U.S. Now it always comes up big, and they always make a big deal out of it because it's so slanted our way. But because of it's such a tiny, tiny part of the trade deal, like they don't zero in on other things like that, basically. And the dairy industry in Canada says the tariffs will be inconsequential for Canadian business one way or another. They could put all kinds of tariffs on Canadian dairy, and it won't make much difference because they're not much of a market for us. And given the fact that we already import more dairy from the U.S. than we produce, I don't really understand. I don't know. You'd have to turn it over to the economists, basically.
But Mike is saying that Canada was won at least 4 times in court over softwood, and they ignore the courts.
Yeah, they do. They did the same thing with steel back in George Bush's time. After the deal was inked, George Bush wanted to stimulate the American steel production was going down. In order to stimulate it, he put restrictions on Canadian steel, and it took 4 years to come to a conclusion in the court. And that's what he knew that was going to happen. He knew that Canada was not abusing the system when it came to steel production, but he wanted to stimulate the American steel industry by restricting Canadian steel, and he did it legally, which took 4 years to resolve. And a little later on, Harper faced the softwood lumber thing, full well knowing that he would have probably been able to win in court, but had to make some kind of other deal to get things going again because you don't want another 4-year thing in court and then say, we won, but meanwhile, 4 years loss of production.
Yeah, the point being is that a court victory takes several years to actually get through anyway, because you're talking about a massive claim here, and putting it together is probably at least a year's worth of work for probably a couple of dozen lawyers, right, to put this claim together. So even when you put it together and then you filed it at the relevant authority, it's then going to take them at least a couple of years before they even properly hear it, right?
Yeah, and if the whole idea is to stall
Yeah.
the amount of steel
It's
or
not
lumber
gonna,
coming into the country, then your lawyers are instructed to make it as Byzantine as possible, to make it slow, ponderous, put
yeah,
up objections that have to be resolved.
exactly. And
Yeah.
each of these, you facing then dozens of motion hearings about the matter. So whoever's defending it's probably got a motion on A and a motion on B and a motion on C, and whatever the issues are, they've got a motion on everything, right?
Yes, and it's just it's just hugely disruptive, and that's why Harper made a separate deal, even though he said that we're in the right, but in order to be right, we're going to lose production, so we'll give them what they want, or part what they want, even though it's contrary to the trade deal we've signed.
Yeah.
People have said that things like the surcharge that Ford has put on the power that goes into the states is illegal. Well, the tariffs that Trump is imposing on us are also illegal. They are not. They are outside the USMCA, and they're using excuses like fentanyl and border crossings, when we all know that that's a two-way trade going back and forth, and that the amount of fentanyl coming from Canada into the United States is extremely minimal. It's probably much more going the other way. We do get a whole lot of drugs coming from the United States, other ones like cocaine and heroin and stuff that they move from the States, not to mention the illegal guns, and not to mention a whole lot of people trying to get here. There's a two-way trade with illegals crossing the border too. So it's a common problem that we could face together, but Trump's decided to put all the blame on us, and using that as an excuse for tariffs.
Yeah. I've got a question for you. You may or may not know the answer. What's the Newfoundland curse?
The Newfoundland curse is a genetic a genetic problem that is faced by certain people in Newfoundland, and there are other peoples that are associated with the Newfoundlanders that came from Denmark and Russia and some other places like that in Germany. Basically, it is a genetic variation that's sort of what they call as a spelling mistake. So if you look at the genetics and the DNA of a certain group of people in heretical have this heretical problem in Newfoundland, and that is the DNA of their heart. A couple of the numbers or whatever it is, genes, had been switched or modified. Very simple ones, just one, I think, is the thing here, and it's caused an unusual arrhythmic.
It causes an unusual arrhythmic and ventricular cardiomyopathy, right? So I got that, but I'm just like, I've never heard of this before.
Well, the reason why this is very interesting is because it's a genetic problem that's found in certain families and is passed on.
Yeah.
And it's basically you could call it rewiring. They call it a spelling mistake in the genetic code, that the genetics have come off wrong somehow. And the only way.
Am I hearing that essentially they're allergic to Newfoundland?
Not so, because it happens in other places too.
Yeah.
So it's arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy.
Yeah.
ARVC.
Yeah.
Yes, as one would think. Yes, that must be it. What happens is the irregular heartbeat then kills people. Causes them a heart attack or
Yeah, but that's not just limited to people who come out of Denmark. I've heard of people in Britain having irregular heartbeats. I don't know. I
it's
don't
not
know.
a regular heartbeat. It's the whole thing. It's the whole thing. It's ARVC. It's not just arrhythmia. It's a particular type
Yeah.
of arrhythmic.
Well, I was going to ask them how is that radically different from what you hear a lot of people anyway.
Well, because
I don't know. I'm not
arrhythmia is very common. I have it.
yeah.
I have it. Arrhythmia is a very common disorder.
I
This
know. I know.
particular
I've heard of arrhythmia being quite quite widespread. As a heart problem that a lot of people have got.
So this is much different.
Yeah.
This is a particular kind.
And I guess that hey, I have to put my hand up in the first instance to say I'm not a doctor, right? I'm not a medical person. I'm not that familiar with these things. I'm reading what I'm reading on a newspaper article, and the journalist is also not a doctor, right?
Here's an explanation. Genes are sections of the DNA, which is made up of a combination of 4 different molecules.
Yeah.
ARVC, this particular arrhythmic condition, is caused by a single swap of those molecules in one gene. A spelling mistake, as the commentator here says. So basically, there's a gene that's swapped out. It's in the wrong place, basically, one single gene in the wrong place. That spelling mistake, so-called spelling mistake, if that could be swapped back, the condition could be fixed. What happens is the arrhythmia causes death rather quickly. And the only way they can solve that right now is to put a kind of a pacemaker in there, kind of a thing that detects the arrhythmia, then shocks the person to get their heart back to normal beats. However, in this particular case, that shock is quite disruptive. It knocks people over. Also, this particular condition, if left for too long, wears down the heart. And the only real cure for it eventually is to get a heart swap. But every time this arrhythmic, this correction happens, where this device put in a heart shocks it back to ordinary rhythm, then that person has to have their license taken away for at least 6 months to make sure that that's okay. Everything just on a safety precaution. Plus, quite often they have to go to the hospital in order to recover from the shock. So basically,
it's a pretty serious situation then.
Yeah. So what Memorial University is doing, and the people there in the article says, they're trying to they're developing genetic manipulation or taking stem cells and recreating heart sort of stem cells, and hope that they can in future reverse this gene, make it spell correctly by doing this. Now they're on their way to doing that, and of course it's a very local thing, and it involves very few people. But of course the spill-offs of such research will be fabulous. And
gene reprogramming is something they've long wanted. Genome reprogramming, isn't it?
Well, yeah, they're on their way to doing all that.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple of different methods they're trying to do. Basically, they want to get into the heart and correct the spelling mistake using either stem cells or other.
Well, yeah, but you see, there's other industry that's been talking about that if one gets this right, one can do things like destruction of fat cells. where some people are gross, have gross overweight problems, you can actually correct those problems through the genome.
Possibly. There is some, basically there's the three body types: mesomorph, ectomorph, and endomorph, basically. And you're not going to get away from that if you're whatever your parents are. So you may have a tendency to gain weight a lot more easier than others. Other people, are sticks. They can eat tons and tons of stuff, never gain any weight.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So those things are part of our makeup anyway.
Yeah.
But the obesity you're talking about there is totally different. There are already drugs.
No, I've heard this mostly talked about. I've heard this genome resequencing mostly talked about when it comes to obesity.
Yeah, you have to be very, very careful there how you do that. They do have that drug that comes from Denmark that helps people reduce weight. It's very expensive, but so there is a lot of research in there. The major problem, of course, with North American obesity is the foods we eat and the foods that are advertised to us day by day by day.
Yeah.
The fast food stuff, etc. When you go into a store and you buy breakfast cereal and it's jam packed with sugar, those kind of things are the main culprits.
And the fact that we're still living on, our official food recommendations are still based in ancient technology, not in modern discovery.
Well, there's all kinds of research on that going forward. The whole idea of removing fat from your diet was sort of misinformed the way they did it.
And now they're looking at
what they did was take the flavor that the fats had and replace them with sugar, and it didn't work because sugar, of course, converts to what?
And sugar is one of the biggest drugs that we have out there today.
Sugar could be thought of as the new tobacco.
Yeah, exactly.
Because of the huge spikes in diabetes, because our bodies were not designed to take on that kind of refined sugar. Our bodies were designed to take the sugars out of the foods we eat.
Yeah, exactly.
Not to have a blast. And the same as the grease and salt. We habituate on grease and salt because that goes way back to our paleo times, and sugar too. So these things seems to be irresistible to us: sugar, fat, and salt. So these are the things that are causing us to gain weight and become an obese society. And I can't talk. I mean, I got a paunch on me.
Yeah. But again, that's exactly one of the one of these DNA cures is actually being looked at for things like weight loss. Anyway, got a couple of comments. Okay. If it's something, I think it's something in the water, right? The only way genes get harmed is from the environment, says Mike. If they find what causes the genetic marker, then they can stop the problem. It's called causation, which they never.
Well, they have identified it. It's like a switch of a gene. A gene that should be one place, but it's the other.
What Mike, I think, is saying is that it comes from the environment that we live in very often.
Possibly, but in this case, it looks just like a genetic mutation.
Yeah,
an isolated genetic.
I don't know. We're in an area
because it occurs in a whole kind of all kinds of different environments. It would be hard to identify a causation that isn't just an ordinary mutation.
Oh, I know. And we're into an area where it's highly specialized knowledge here. And I don't think neither you nor I have got that kind of, that knowledgeable about the subject matter.
I know everything, but I just don't like to brag.
Right. Niagara's in for a warmer than normal start to spring.
I read that. I thought that would be a feel-good kind of article because everything's so heavy with the trade thing and the wars and all that. I thought, well, this is a bit of a good news thing that we're going to have much more mild spring than we normally do. And as we saw by yesterday, at least, that was a lovely day. I was walking around without a coat.
We've now gotten rid of now, other than those huge piles in the parking lot, in and around our gardens, I think we've gotten rid of like 90% of the snow piles now.
Well, don't cross your fingers too yet. We can still too soon.
Yeah,
but what I forgot to do before this morning, and it only occurred to me a little while ago, so I couldn't do any other research on it. How is this going to affect our farmers, particularly the orchard farmers? I hear that, so now we are at a situation where it's very nice to have this weather, and we're walking around and without coats on and and just enjoying the sun. But we can't hope that we've got to kind of hope that it doesn't go too warm, because we don't want the farmers to get screwed.
Yeah, and this is the worst, of course, is when you get these full springs, you suddenly get the buds that kind of start to say, oh, it's time for me to open. And then it freezes up. And of course, those buds die.
Well, remember back, I think it was about 15 years ago when we had too early, a false spring, sort of a too early spring.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it affected the tender fruit industry.
The grape industry was there about that time as well.
Well, I was thinking more along apples and stuff like that. And the
apples. Oh, no, yeah, I'm just saying grape industry has been affected at certain times with this as well.
So, like I said before, we had that one year where there was a sort of collapse in apple production, which, being a big apple fan myself, I thought that was like the disaster approaching 9/11, basically.
Yeah.
Less apples. Oh boy.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so
I'm addicted to apples.
So anything more on that?
Nothing much more, except that we can enjoy it, but we also hope that it doesn't get too far away from the norms where our farmers will find themselves in a situation where their crops are overly affected by this, because early warming and then back to cooling could disrupt the whole thing, whole harvest of all things. Like they're already, I guess, preparing for the strawberries kind of thing, because I think they're one of the first to come up. But what you don't want to do really is have these nice warm patches of weather and then throw them back into freezing. I mean, that's what happens in Southern Ontario anyway. So we don't want it to get too extreme. So enjoy the weather. This just hope it doesn't get to the point where it hurts our farmers.
Yeah. The worst we get is actually when it grows up. We have a sustained period of warm, which allows the blossoms, the buds to start opening, and then it freezes again. That's the worst period you get.
Yes, and so basically, enjoy the warm weather and just hope doesn't get
you
cold.
need to go to Cuddly Apple Farm and try the silken apple, best apple you've ever had, says Kit Finn.
Oh, okay. My particular favorite is the russet, which is have to really find it nowadays.
It's very difficult to get a russet. Yeah, absolutely agree. Blossoms.
Let's put it this way: they've never grown a bad apple. Just some all apples are good. Some are just gooder than others.
I'm going to disagree with you. There are very good apples and there are very bad apples.
Well, you don't know nothing.
I know a lot. You
don't know nothing.
And there are certain apples like Golden Delicious that I think are trash.
Gone out with you. Who let this guy into this country? I'm going to the immigration agent right now and get rid of you.
Okay, so
there's ice when you need it.
Right. Okay. So blossoms early is a huge problem because there's a freeze while blossoming. You're screwed. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
They
that's
named it
what
after
I'm
a
worried about.
Canadian Olympian, Silken Lauman. Okay, the Silken Apple. Okay,
Wow.
there you go.
Wow,
Okay.
I don't think I've had one of them. Woo! A new apple. Oh yeah.
Can't say I know the one you're talking about, but okay. Happy.
I don't think I've ever seen
Right.
one of them in stores. Maybe in the farmers market when it pops up again, we'll find some more.
And just as okay, so Niagarans are reacting to Trump's tariffs and annexation threats against Canada. I think it's not just Niagarans; it's pretty well everybody across the board because I've seen articles about this from British Columbia to Newfoundland in the last week.
But yeah, but of course, this is the Niagara Falls Review, and it's focusing in on this area. Now, because we have so much cross-border shopping. I have relatives over there. Just about everybody's got a relative, and if not a relative, at least a friend from the United States, right there, right close in the border. We do a lot of back and forth here. We depend on a lot of American tourists. This does feel like a betrayal, and I don't. And I don't want to blame the American people at all on this. I, of course, boil it down to one guy.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we do feel betrayed because we've been their friends. We fought for democracy in World War II over 2 years before the Americans got in. So we held the fort for democracy, basically, held back the fascism before the Americans. So and then after that, we fought alongside them. We landed at Normandy together.
Yeah,
all these things. We went to Afghanistan with the Americans after 9/11. So this whole idea that we've been trying to build, we've got a 5,000 long mile border that is undefended. So we've had this really good relationship, this really good trade relationship, camaraderie between two democracies, and this looks like an extreme betrayal. And I think so too. I think this is a turn against democracy and rules-based order that the Americans were the ones that built up. We could see the betrayal of Ukraine when the Americans signed an agreement back in 1994 to support Ukraine in case it was invaded, and only did that sort of partially, and now is demanding that Ukraine submit and kowtow to Russia. So there has been a general feeling of betrayal all over. And this one, because we're the closest friends and allies of the United States, we definitely are shocked by this. And of course, people in this area are especially shocked.
Yeah.
Now, there's people saying, I'm not going to go to a Sabres game. I'm not going to this and that. Well, I fully intend. I was at a Sabres game just a little while ago. Last week, I intend to go to a lacrosse game soon in the States. So I don't, and I think in April I'll be going down to Florida to visit a friend of mine. So I don't do anything.
You see, one of the things when I hear about what we're dealing with, and I hear about, oh, we must buy Canadian this and that and the other. For example, taking the American stuff off the shelves at LCBO. I'm of the mind that if people don't want to buy American, you leave the stuff on the shelves. If people don't want to buy American, they don't buy it. LCBO has already bought that product. For them to take it off the shelves doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's a product they may have bought 6 months ago that's currently on the shelves. and they've already paid the money for that product. And if we don't want to buy, if you make a decision not to buy new American, that's a different matter. Leave the old product on the shelves.
No, I think what Doug Ford is doing is pretty good. I think it's largely a lot of this is symbolic, and
I know, but
to remove that and to get into the newspapers and the media by doing that is bringing an attention to this. As we found out last week, a lot of Americans were really not too aware of the trade.
what bothers me?
Found out that the Canadians in Fort Erie knew everything about, knew how all kinds of comments and opinions about the tariffs. And when we went over with the same reporter went to the Buffalo, he had difficulty finding anybody that knew anything about it.
Yeah.
And so I think what Doug Ford is doing is going to make it very glaring to the average American person what the situation their country's in by doing these symbolic things. I think it's a good thing. So.
Well, yeah, but I also, one of the things that I react badly whenever I see something and I think it through and think to myself, who are going to be the people affected most? And if the answer in my mind is jobs, then I don't care whether it's American jobs or Canadian jobs. I don't want jobs to be sacrificed for these symbolic gestures.
Nobody does, and not even Doug Ford wants that to happen. But if somebody slaps you and you don't slap them back,
I know, I get it. I'm not
slapped. So
I'm not an objection.
Trump wants to reduce the amount of people in Canada working in the car industry. He wants to take away the amount of people that are working in the lumber industry and all of that and put it into the United States. So he wants to hurt us. So if you hurt us, we'll hurt you. That's the message.
Yeah. And of course then we're getting to the question that Doug Ford is looking at getting is talking tough. Right?
Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, if you notice that even Danielle Smith out west, the premier of Alberta, was very, very conciliatory towards the Americans. She went down to Florida and talked to Trump with Mr. Wonderful there, Kevin O'Leary. And Kevin O'Leary is always saying, well, you can't really listen to what he says. You gotta see what his methods are and all that. And she bought that for a while. But now she's come around and talking like Doug Ford is doing. You want to fight? We'll fight. Before that, it was, oh, well, maybe we can make a deal. Maybe we could find some kind of understanding. It's very obvious that Trump doesn't want that conciliatory.
Well,
so she's talking tough. She's talking tough. Doug Ford's talking tough. Remember, in the early going, Doug Ford was slightly critical of Danielle Smith, saying, look, don't try to soft talk this too much. Don't try to bend too much because he'll just keep making you bend.
Yeah.
And so now she's come across and saying, well, that's it. No, it's very obvious. You want to hurt us and we'll fight back.
You see, when we're talking symbolic, closing the power on Super Bowl Sunday, that was symbolic. That would have been symbolic.
Well, maybe. But really, things hadn't ratcheted up to that point, that particular time. And
I know they hadn't, but that was a point to actually have made the point. If you're going to make a point, that was the day to do it. That would have hurt American TV viewers without hurting Americans overall. I
don't know. But anyway, I'm not in the war room at Doug Ford's at Queen's Park. I'm not in the war room.
I know.
And, well, I'm not seeing what he sees.
I know. I get that.
He's an existential threat to Ontario, and I'm with him. You know what? At first, you try a conciliatory thing. Some guy, like you've been in. I don't know. Have you ever been in a fight in a bar or something, and some guy's getting pissy, and you try to calm him down, and you try to walk away, but he just keeps coming after you. So what do? You pop him one, right? That's what Doug Ford's doing.
I know. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that I'm objecting to a lot of what Doug Ford is doing. It's just that my biggest problem in all of this is when it comes to affecting people's livelihoods. That's when I have the biggest trouble. You see, for example, saying don't buy American products, don't buy McDonald's, don't buy Starbucks, don't buy a number of things like that, Subway, for example. Well, I'm putting aside whether McDonald's is good or bad for you. It's a different question entirely. But the point being is if you don't buy McDonald's, there are tens of thousands of jobs impacted across Canada by not buying McDonald's. There is,
McDonald's is a little bit different, isn't it? Because the beef comes from Ontario, right?
Yeah.
So the beef comes from Ontario.
That's another issue. Most of that is locally grown anyway. What we get in Ontario, McDonald's in Ontario, yes, sources local beef. And again, probably McDonald's in Alberta sources local beef. And the same probably in BC as well.
I don't see a whole lot of ideas about restricting. The only one, Starbucks, I think, was the one that they were keying up on.
Again, there are thousands.
I don't see a whole lot of voices saying don't eat McDonald's, don't eat Subway. That would just hurt the local businesses.
Yeah.
I don't see a whole lot there. But what I do see is don't buy oranges from Spain instead of Florida. Buy avocados from Mexico.
Yeah, well, that's a choice we can always.
Basically, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, those kind of choices have always been available. The fact we've never used them is shame on us.
Yeah, like you're not going to say, well, don't buy General Motors because General Motors is an American company. Well, General Motors is made here, so that'd be dumb.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the kind of thing,
And the whole thing is, are you sure a McDonald's hamburger is beef? Well, that's an entirely different question, Mike. The whole question about whether McDonald's is healthy is not part of this whole discussion, right? And again, the whole question about whether you should support Starbucks' business practices because of what the CEO did to a whole host of American workers. That's another question entirely, right? If you want to stop buying Starbucks for that reason, that's fine. Don't buy it because it's an American product. Don't stop buying it because it's American. Remember it employs thousands of people across Canada.
Yeah, the issue is not that. It isn't. Yeah. So if like, for instance, I don't know, like, I mean, it's just like them boycotting Tim Hortons. What good would that do? There's Tim Hortons in the United States. So why, why would they want to boycott?
In fact, actually, Tim Hortons isn't actually Canadian. The whole ownership of Tim Hortons is up for question right now anyway.
Yeah. And what are you going to do? What about beer? Beer is a kind like, I think Molson's is owned by a Belgian company. It's all global. That's the whole situation. That's what makes tariffs so untenable because we have a global system of trade, and that was to be. That's a good thing overall. So say economists, because you enrich the entire planet with global trade and competition. What protectionism does is stifle a lot of that, and that's what the American administration wants.
And Mike's saying rightly go again here. Time to pull up your big boy pants and find new trading partners. Absolutely. Dave? Done it again. Looks like Dave's gone walkabouts again. Right. Leaves us going with one other related issue, which is that Algoma Central Corporation's taken delivery of 3 new vessels. Right? Since 2013, Algoma has built 23 new vessels with 12 or more under construction. And the milestone reflects Algoma's commitment to making capital investments to its customers' needs. So basically, they're recognizing the trade up and down the St. Lawrence, and obviously the fact they've taken ownership of 3 new vehicles, 3 new vessels this week, is actually the orders probably were placed 5 years ago anyway. So there's nothing at all to do with tariffs here. So this is an unusually kind of non-tariff type story, really. And the buying of these new vessels is just something that it happens. Remaining 5, they've still got 5 more vessels that are actually scheduled for delivery throughout 2025. So obviously it takes a while to build vessels. So now Algoma obviously have put these thoughts together, and in fact, actually, some of these vessels are being built on a joint venture between Algoma and Tank, which is a Swedish company who produce tankers. So they are doing Vesberg do climate-friendly dual fuel tankers, and those are what have been coming into operation this week, and they can load. One example is they load cargo in China, and they can begin trading through Northern Europe in second quarter of 2025. So some of these tankers are brand new, operating on the oceans, not just in the Great Lakes. All right, and it looks like that Dave is not coming back. Got a couple of comments here. Has Canada offered Canadian steel for all buildings? Good question there, Mike. That's and Canadian steel for all construction. Yep. Well, certainly commercial construction, which relies upon steel. Right. Absolutely. And the use of steel and the iron and steel industry is, particularly for commercial building, is absolutely essential. Yeah. And hey, even building these ships, if they're building more of them, it's another place where our Canadian steel can go, right? And maybe we can be doing deals with our Swedish partners here. And again, it takes years to build a ship, right? And ships don't get built on a whim, and it's not a 6-month project. This is a multi-year project to build a ship. So it takes a lot of planning, and the planning into this went ahead probably more than 5 years ago from Algoma's perspective. So looks like Dave isn't coming back on this occasion, and I think we'll kind of leave it there. Unless, of course, you've got anything more to say, Mike. And I think you might well be our last listener right now. So I'm going to leave it at that point. And I think it's important that my biggest concern in all of this, with all of the tariffs, etc., is people losing jobs. People losing jobs is bad for an economy, people losing jobs or economic failure. The economy and jobs so entwined that we actually need to consider them in everything that we do. And I'm not saying that Doug is wrong. I'm just saying that my first thought about any of these things is what happens to the jobs, right? And I'm going to leave it at that point and say goodbye.